will be discussing how civic movement, civic resistance can be organized and can be done during the time of lockdown, during the COVID pandemic in different parts of the world. And if you are kind of aware what the civic movements usually do, you might ask the question, okay, they named the conference Depolarization. So how does it come together, actually, these two things? And we believe that also that the depolarization should not be done on the cost of human rights and human dignity, freedom, and other important values of the democratic society. So we will be really speaking about non-violent civic actions and how they could be done in the difficult times of global pandemic. And before I introduce our four speakers, I just would like to remind you few ground rules, this netiquette, as they like to call it today. And it seems that almost most of you have switched on your camera. And it would be very helpful, especially for our speakers, to really see your faces and your reactions, because it gives them some feedback. So please, if you can, if you do not have difficulties with connections, it might be the reason to switch off your cameras, please have it on. All of you have muted microphones, so if you do not speak, please mute your microphone. Personalize your login. All of you have your names there. If you please can add the country from which you are coming to your name, it would help us a lot. And as you might have noticed, we are recording this session. We would like to share the presentation part publicly and discussion part with the registered participants of the conference. So we hope it's okay to record the session. If you have particular difficulty with that, you can switch off your camera. And, but please, if you can have it on, it would be much better. And for the structure of this session, we will have approximately 40 minutes for presentation by our four speakers. And after that, you will have a possibility to discuss directly, to verbally ask questions and to discuss among ourselves. If you have some questions or comments, or you would like to introduce yourself during the presentation part, please use the chat for that. You can write the message to everybody or private messages as you like. And not to take too much time, I would like to move to introduction of our four speakers. And I'm particularly happy because they are coming from 4 different continents. So I will start with Nadine Bloch from United States of America, from BeautifulTrouble. She's currently working as a training director for BeautifulTrouble. Nadine is innovative artist, nonviolent practitioner, political organizer, direct action trainer, and puppetista. Hope you understand that word. She for a very long time already tries to combine the very creative cultural activities with the political action. And she's interested in reclaiming our agency over our own lives. So that's Nadine. And she will start this presentation, but before I will also introduce other 3 speakers. Phil Wilmot, he already, Nadine as well, a little bit introduced for those of you who came earlier, but he's actually at the moment living in Uganda. He cooperates with BeautifulTrouble, and I was just looking at his book. He has written from Uganda prison. And it seems to be incredibly strong about how to work on resistance, even if you are, the consequences are that you are jailed. His book is named A Wolf Dressed in Sheepskin, White Guy's Dilemma in a Uganda Jail Cell. Our next speaker is from Brazil, and it's Carolina Munis. She has a bachelor degree in international relations, and she is a member of a school of activism. She, in Brazil, supports progressive social movements, and I'm very curious about her stories as well. And finally, Søren Varburg from Denmark. When he introduces himself, he starts that he is dead, political organizer, social movement and civic resistance strategist. And he is lover of the Rosa Luxemburg, especially because of the idea of spontaneity of the movements. So, and he is at the moment head of youth organizing and activism of the Action Aid Denmark. So these are our 4 speakers, and they will manage themselves this presentation part, which will take approximately 14 minutes. So I will ask Nadine to take a lead of that. Please, Nadine.
Thank you, Kaya. Thank you, Lucas. Thank you, PCDS and the Embassy of the Netherlands and everyone who's put so much into it. We're so glad you've chosen to spend some time with us today. We all look really forward to the discussion part later and the collaboration part. Really happy to be here. So I'm going to share my screen, and we are going to have a little bit of a quick look at BeautifulTrouble and the universe of BeautifulTrouble. Very, very, very brief overview. And then we will also be talking just about some specific pieces of the work that we do, in particular to highlight how we move from polarization by looking at culture and our activism into a place where we can do much more work together for a better future. So here we are, we're going to start. Just for those of you who are not familiar with BeautifulTrouble, there's a whole universe of BeautifulTrouble. And actually, I'm going to invite you right now. We normally do extremely heavily interactive workshops. So this little chat here for some number of minutes is not always what we do. So in the spirit of interactivity, when you hear the word BeautifulTrouble, what comes to mind? Can you put one word in the chat box of when you hear BeautifulTrouble, what are you thinking about? Just one word. It might be, I have no idea what it will be. Could be something to do with activism, something not to do with activism, something to do with your personal life or your children. I don't know, but go ahead and just put something in the chat box when you hear that word, just so we can just start thinking about it. And while you're doing that, I'm going to tell you what we think of when we say BeautifulTrouble. We think of this whole universe of resources and a toolkit online and in-person trainings and jam sessions. We even have a card deck, which we're going to use to look at some things today. We have study guides, and most of these things are available for free on our websites, beautifultrouble.org or beautifulrising.org. We also, very soon, will have a brand new website available in Arabic, Spanish, Portuguese, and English, and many of our resources are available in many languages. Accessibility to this information is key to us. So we also have a chat bot so you can download pieces directly onto your phone. So we'll go really quickly to the next slide. Now, one of the things about our work is that we start with stories because we know how powerful they are, in particular in this work on conflict transformation and how we are going to change the world. We know that the stories we tell ourselves, the stories that we hear, are places where we can really anchor our understanding of the world. But we don't stop there with the telling of stories. So we take those stories and we tease out the lessons that come from those stories, the tactics, the theories, principles, and we even share methodologies on how to access good strategic thinking so that we can have much more access to the gems of wisdom from these stories and be able to easily contextualize them for our own particular circumstance. Now, I did mention this really briefly, but it's worth mentioning again, that we often get attracted to some of this work because the tactics are so much fun, they're creative. And as an artist, I can totally say this, you know, oh, if I just build this giant puppet, everything will be better. And well, maybe that's not quite true, because without a big frame or the structure of strategic thinking, knowing where we want to head and assessing what kind of skills we have, we don't necessarily get what we want from our tactics. Our tactics will not necessarily deliver. So all of the work that we're talking about today is couched in that understanding that there is a lot of thinking and a lot of strategic work that goes behind effective implementation of tactics and other things. Now, I'm going to pass over to my wonderful comrade and collaborator, Carolina in Brazil, and she's going to take it away for the next few slides. Go ahead.
Thank you, Nadine. So hi again, everyone. I'm going to go on and on. So if there's anything I'm saying that you can't understand, please feel free to interrupt me, okay, at any time. I don't mind being interrupted at all, especially by such a great group here. So what I'm going to talk about is the work that happens behind the curtains before a movement is strong enough to be able to work, especially in a polarized scenario. But this can go really for any scenario. So Nadine just spoke about how tactics alone are not enough. And especially if you're a movement working in a polarized scenario, that kind of dynamic is going to challenge the relationships in the movement and the thinking of the movement at all times. So my work is a lot about building a strong foundation, especially with movements that have a lot of potential, but really need to build that sense of community before they can venture out into a field that's going to challenge them at all times and want them to locate inside a polarized scenario. So for a few years now, I've been doing work with a network of sex workers in a state in Brazil called Minas Gerais. It's right north from the state where I live in Sao Paulo. And these are women who they're in a very vulnerable situation economically, socially. Many of them are doing sex work by choice. Some are not doing sex work by choice. These are mothers. These are women from all ages and races, mostly living in the outskirts of the capital of the state called Belo Horizonte. And the prostitution there is organized in prostitution hotels in which the women have to actually pay for the rooms at very high rates to hotel owners, often connected to local organized crime, and to be able to do their work in a slightly safer environment than just the street. And Belo Horizonte is known in Latin America for being a hub of sex work. And what we're trying to do there is really build on some of the rising and emerging movements that the women have formed to protect their dignity in their work, not really to remove them from sex work, but to make sure that they have more dignity if they choose to do their work. But before they can venture out into a very challenging field that's going to question their existence, that's going to question their choice of work, that's going to question the very idea that female sex workers can be recognized as workers. So before we do that, we're trying to do a lot of background work behind the curtains to make sure we build a bond between these women and a strong mindset for them to go and face the political environment, especially right now in Brazil, because we have a lovely president who is about everything that is really against the lives of not just these women, but a woman like myself. So the first thing that we are trying to do with these lives that are really often permeated with violence, with loss, with deprivation, we're trying to exercise joy. So this is a necessary step to build a vision for a social movement. Because if a movement's vision is informed only by overcoming the suffering and oppression that we have right now, it doesn't really propose a constructive alternative. Right, so you need an attractive vision, that it's attractive both to the movement members and to your passive supporters and your active supporters, and even the neutral sectors of society around you. So Phil's going to talk a little more about the different sectors of society that may or may not support your movement and how do you go about that. But really, so they have to build a vision for this movement that is based on feelings like joy and excitement, and not only anger. And of course, anger is legitimate, but the vision for the future has to be something that evokes the feelings that we want to see in our daily lives. And also, if being in a struggle doesn't bring you joy, if it doesn't bring you fun, if it doesn't bring you a sense of belonging, what's the point in doing it? And first, and second, your risk of burning out or losing purpose along the way is far greater. So the picture here shows the beginning of a dancing game that we did with the women at a collective gathering. It was right before the pandemic hit Brazil, so this was in March of this year. And the smaller image here with the little microphone and the lips is an ad that they did for a singing and rap contest to showcase the musical talents of their fellow sex workers. So this was an online music contest that the women held in June this year, already an attempt to counter the effects of social isolation and lockdown during the pandemic, and trying to build again a sense of community through art this time. So joy is a revolutionary force. That's what our card says here. Protests can be fun. They should be fun whenever it's appropriate, and finding pleasure in the process and letting creativity and joy guide you. This is an ethical stance when looking at civil resistance. And then can we move on to the next one? And this is really great. So don't just brainstorm. Please, by all means, art storm. So the word brainstorm alone, it contains the brain, which is the part of our bodies that is most valued in capitalist society, right? Rational, logical thinking particularly is very valued in the capitalist world, and it's very much associated to the male identity, right? Rational thinking, logical thinking. But there are other forms of human reason that are just as wise as logical thinking that comes from our brain. So what if we think about the knowledge that comes from our instinct, the knowledge that comes from our emotions? So with this little picture here, it shows one of the women in Belo Horizonte. They don't appreciate having their faces exposed to people who don't know them personally. So I've covered it here with a little heart. And right behind her, you'll see these images, these drawings of their bodies. So the way the women developed a vision for their movement was through their bodies. So the body is like the most concrete form of existence they have. It's one that is deeply connected with their lives as sex workers also. So we did an exercise with them where they let themselves be guided by their bodies to understand the needs that they had, and with that form of vision for what kind of life they wanted to see in the future. So what are we going after as a movement? And art storming is pretty anti-capitalist, I would say. There's a quote by Hakim Bey in the BeautifulTrouble toolkit that says, art storming is anti-capitalist. That's right. Where is it? Under capitalism, we have become increasingly alienated from our direct experiences with each other and with our art. So art storming is an opportunity to reconnect with ourselves, our art, and each other. So we could have gone through a number of strategic analysis here with the women to develop a vision for the movement. There's a bunch of how-to guides on how to develop a vision connected to strategic goals. But here we really wanted to emphasize the kind of knowledge that comes from different forms of thinking and different forms of human reason. Can we move on to the next one? Thank you. You know, this also, the last thing about art storming is that it also connects with polarization in a way that polarization is deeply fueled by emotions, particularly fear. So if we create, polarization also creates imaginaries that are often disconnected from our concrete bodily experience, right? So it creates a sort of in many aspects, polarization creates a sort of fantasy narrative, you know, and fear of what society could be like if the other side wins. So connecting to the body and this most tangible, foundational form of experience is a great way to really reassess what you really want from a movement that might not be something in opposition to the existence of the other. And here, so now we're going into a little more of the actions that the women did around the COVID-19 crisis, which are also really useful to develop that sort of community bond that we're really looking to develop with them. So during the COVID-19 crisis, the sex workers, they decided to distribute this personalized donation pack to nearly 200 of their peers. And in the picture here, they're showing these little beauty and wellness kits that they put together containing products that were made by their peers. So many of the sex workers, they also do lots of arts and crafts, and they also do beauty products. They do their own shampoo and soap. So they were able to map out the women who had other sources of income and include those products in a little beauty and wellness pack, because we have to not only think about what do we have to survive, you know, the food on our table, but also the other parts of our existence that really forge our identity and our sense of self. And so they decided also to distribute those donations. Like I said, they were able to reach nearly 200 women. Of course, it was complicated to think about the logistics. It was an experiment for them. But all in all, what happened throughout the process is really developing a sense of connecting to your peers and reaching out to the women who have a similar experience that you have. Why does this all matter, connecting to polarization? So community and autonomy and interdependence, which is really what we're trying to develop here, they offset the emotional and symbolic narratives that feed into polarization. And why is that? Because community in itself is not something of the right wing or of the left wing. Community is not something that belongs only to a part of society. And community is not a homogeneous group. It's not a group of people who are exactly the same, but precisely because community is an exercise in difference, in the ethics of difference. When you're part of a community, you have to deal with the difference of your peers in that community all the time. So from the very work of having to deliver, organize packs of donations to 200 women who do the same kind of work you do in the same kind of city you do, but have all of these singularities in their lives that you have to really take into consideration when planning on how to help them. From, you know, reaching out to your peers and forming this alliance to build a wellness pack, a beauty pack, which is something that the process is even far richer than just the result itself. This is always an exercise in difference. It doesn't mean that the women are dealing with their equals, right? There's always difference in these relationships. And this is sort of a first training for us to be able to deal in an ethical way with the difference that we're going to run across once we're out there in the political scenario in this moment in time in this country. Also, I wanted to mention the card here, breakfast is persuasive. This is a really great principle from BeautifulTrouble. So providing a direct service that benefits your community, it can speak louder than any rhetorical argument. Living out the values of self-reliance can empower the community to engage in deeper organizing. So when, you know, especially when you're dealing with vulnerable communities and movement building in vulnerable communities, offering direct services, offering direct aid. And this was really positively fueled by the mutual aid efforts during the COVID-19 crisis. When you're doing that, you're able to form a bond and an alliance with these people that is far stronger than just having a great discourse, a great rhetorical discourse on why this cause is great and why is this struggle a struggle worth fighting for. And then solidarity economics, which is a term that probably most of us here are familiar with. If not, please feel free to say so. And solidarity economics is a lot rooted in Latin American values and the values of buen vivir, or good living, which is drawn from the native peoples of Latin and Central America. And it means essentially building autonomy and interdependence, right? So we're able to really let go of the dependence that we have from the hegemonic agents in society and build an interdependence in our community. So sourcing products from your fellow sex workers could really lead to a form of autonomy and interdependence, where you don't have to really depend on the products that are supplied to you by outside hegemonic actors, right? So this is a little bit of the images that I wanted to bring up. And all in all, you know, this really connects to polarization because of the foundations that you have to build in a movement before or also while you're there dealing with the different political forces that are going to try to locate you in a polarized political spectrum. It also connects to polarization because the efforts here, they're really about building strength in a movement and helping the movement see a way out of polarization. So we're building sort of the exit door to polarization, right? If the movement is really strong, if the community is really strong, and if there are tangible changes to these women's lives and not really narrative, you know, rhetorical resources that are really trying to make them gravitate towards a struggle, we can maybe escape the spell that society puts on us when we're in a polarized society, right? So this is sort of the counter spell. So it's a kind of magic that we exercise to maybe in a future have movements that refuse polarization and that say, well, let's focus more on ourselves and building our community and building strength here. And then maybe it doesn't matter as much, you know, what kind of things other sectors of society are saying about us, because our focus is in here. And we're trained in an exercise of difference, and we can bear the difference of those people on the other side of the spectrum. We can engage in dialogue with them. We have the openness to do it because there is an ethics of difference in the movement. And now we're going to hear a great story by my friend Phil that's going to look a little bit more about how to deal with the different sectors of society as you move through a polarized scenario, and also a great story of occupation in Uganda.
Thanks, Carolina. Thanks so much to PDCS for organizing this. It's really a privilege to be here with all of you. I'm really looking forward to having more discussion after we present. So I just want to quickly give a story from Acholi land, which is a northernmost area of East Africa. And I want to start with this quote by Saul Alinsky. I'll just read the first half. Saul Alinsky was an organizer in the United States who wrote a book called Rules for Radicals. So this quote comes from there. He said, "Before people can act, an issue must be polarized. People will act when they are convinced that their cause is 100% on the side of the angels and that the opposition are 100% on the side of the devil. There can be no action until issues are polarized to this degree." So although I'm kind of starting with this framing, try to look for the nuance between escaping polarization and you know, deliberately working toward polarization in a way that helps you build power. So this isn't supposed to be like a pro-polarization or anti-polarization presentation, but just to kind of hold that tension so that we can think more nuanced and strategic in our efforts. You can go to the next slide. So there is a community in Acholi land in a village called Apa. And this community has been subjected to all kinds of human rights abuses, forced evictions. You can see a house here that was burnt down and destroyed by armed forces in Uganda. And this has gone on for years and years. I joined this organizers of this campaign in 2011. But I'm just kind of going to share today a brief window of something that happened in 2018, 2 years ago. So this is a very protracted struggle to protect community ancestral land for the Acholi people of Apa. But I won't have time, to share the whole kind of history behind it. But suffice it to say that they're trying to protect their land from violent attacks and forced evictions by the state and private sector that is trying to take their land and natural resources. So one of the things that this community did was document the sites of all of the families that had been subjected to these forced evictions and violent attacks. So the picture at the top is a poster with 844 houses, homesteads that were destroyed, like the one in the other picture here. And so the community brought this evidence to, of course, they tried, putting it before political leaders, but the political leaders weren't acting in a way that benefited this community in terms of protecting its land, because they also had a stake, they also had an interest in stealing the land. And so the community decided, okay, if our enemies won't listen to us, well, what do we do? Is there a secondary target that can push our enemies or pull our enemies in a particular direction? And they identified the United Nations as one of the bodies that is meant to do this kind of diplomatic work, protecting human rights, protecting land rights and ecology and so on. And so they brought this poster to the office, their nearest office of the United Nations, which is in a town called Gulu, about 2 hours from Apa village. You can go to the next slide. So the UN, maybe unsurprisingly, didn't commit to doing anything. So the community asked them, like, now that we've brought you all of the evidence, all of the documentation of these abuses, can you ask the government to stop killing us, to stop brutalizing us? And the UN didn't make that commitment. And so 234 members of APA, residents of APA, who had brought that evidence, said, it's okay, we'll wait. So they started pitching tents within the compound of the UN office. You can see a UN car in the back there. And they said, until you're ready to do your diplomatic work and ask the government to cease fire, we're not ready to leave. So they staged this occupation. You can go to the next slide. And the UN, of course, doesn't really like criticism, especially the international staff that are, located to Uganda and are, heading up different offices. And what the way that they responded was to actually seize the placards, the signs that you see in this picture. They stole them from the people who are waging this peaceful protest. And they started to do a lot of intimidation, working with local law enforcement to curtail local and national and international media from covering this event. So this is, as far as we know, like the first long-term or medium-term and large-scale occupation of a UN office in the world. And it didn't get almost any media attention because the UN was conniving with Uganda's armed services to curtail the freedom of press, which is, of course, one of the rights that they're meant to uphold. You can go to the next slide. And we were able to get the word out. So what was quite interesting is we had only, of those 234 occupiers, only 3 or 4 had smartphones and were able to be coordinating with allies on the outside of this gate, because the occupiers couldn't just leave, go and eat, go and sleep somewhere else and come back. That would make them, that would put them at risk of arrest or of other abuse. And they knew that at the same time, the Uganda government could not come in with tear gas and just open fire as they often do at the compound of a UN office. So they were kind of protected in that strategic location. And we had to get creative about ways in which people could contribute to sustaining their occupation, because even after a week or two, the UN still was refusing to do any work related to this APA land protection. And so food was running out, firewood was running out. And so one of the principles within the BeautifulTrouble toolkit is to create many points of entry. So if you want many allies in society to get involved, you have to give them the sort of infrastructure to be involved. In fact, there's been work about, research work about organizing, and they found that the most common reason that somebody contributes to any kind of social or political campaign is because somebody asked them to. So, you know, one of the big things that we have to do as organizers is to ask people to contribute something. It doesn't need to be, you know, always politically strategic or amazing, but the general idea is to broaden the base of participation, build, you know, a community around the particular issue that you are engaged in. And the top picture here is foodstuffs that were delivered from local farmers and market vendors. So a few organizers that were able to communicate from the occupation to other allies outside the occupation, asked them to go to the marketplaces and encourage farmers and people selling in the marketplaces to make a contribution. So all of a sudden you had many, you know, low-wage workers, unemployed folks able to actually contribute something, even if it's just a kilo of beans or something of the kind. And the bottom picture is a picture of residents of a PA that did not join the occupation, bringing firewood and other construction materials to the occupation. And it wasn't easy to get through the gate, so they had to actually work with neighbors to deliver supplies over the wall. You can go to the next slide. So as kind of momentum was building, we didn't list it here. One of the principles in the card deck is to escalate strategically. So you want your campaign to kind of be building power and not lose momentum. And so as the campaign was getting more and more attention, despite the curtailing of media and press freedoms, a lot of local leaders decided that they wanted to align themselves with the occupation. Of course, they didn't care. A lot of them didn't care. These are politicians, cultural leaders, you know, musicians, figureheads in society. You know, whether or not a PA protected its land may not be their top issue, but the fact that, you know, it was getting so much popular support from their constituents and you know, different sectors in society, some of them actually came to the occupation. This is a picture of a politician coming and kind of pledging his support to the occupation, and, you know, making his sort of speeches. One of the interesting things about this community, they didn't allow anybody to speak on their behalf, which is quite rare in a society that has a lot of, you know, NGOs that organize, you know, press conferences all the time and speak on behalf of people. So even where they did welcome leaders, they would not allow those leaders to make any decisions in relation to their, you know, their negotiations with the UN or with the state. And so I just share this quick, it's really an oversimplified view of one aspect of a large protracted campaign, but I just share it quickly because one of the tools within the BeautifulTrouble toolkit that's really helpful for thinking about how do we depolarize and or polarize in a strategic way is this spectrum of allies. And the spectrum of allies, basically the philosophy is that movements that can mobilize 3.5% of their populations to take action for their cause are winning movements. They win their objectives. And so the idea is that, you know, you can see in the spectrum, you have on one side, you have active allies. On the other side, you have your active opposition. And it's basically something to encourage us not to always target our active opposition and assume that, you know, the best way toward getting what we want is to figure out a way forward together with our, you know, most staunch opponents. Rather, there might be allies in society that we can start to build power with if we create those points of entry for them. So the farmers in this case, you know, and eventually even the neutral segments of society that were not even remotely touching this land issue, such as the politicians and the musicians and the cultural leaders who came around to pledge their support once they saw that, you know, there was some momentum behind this particular campaign. And then maybe just a last quick note about this segment in the middle right called the passive opposition. So these are, you know, people who may or may not agree with us, but they tend to benefit from the system in some way. And, you know, we don't actually need to come to some kind of like resolution that's a compromise with them necessarily, but it does help to kind of bring them to a neutral space, neutralize their impact. So whereas the UN had been kind of working behind closed doors on different fundraising initiatives with the Ugandan state and didn't want to jeopardize that diplomacy, the UN was benefiting financially and otherwise from the attacks in Apa. So it was kind of strategic to put them front and center in this campaign and make them choose a side. And in that way, they didn't come to the aid of these people. Ultimately, they didn't go and negotiate with the government or anything, but they were sort of neutralized. Their impact was neutralized. So the idea of the spectrum of allies is to kind of take each of those segments and pull it at least one step closer to your movement in that active allies category. So I know it's kind of a dense, quick overview of the spectrum of allies. I do encourage you to check it out on the Beautiful Trouble website. It makes quite a lot of sense when you can read through. And that, I believe, is it for my slides. At this juncture, I would like to pass it to Comrade Søren Varburg.
Yeah, thanks, Phil, and thanks everyone again for allowing us to talk to you today. So I want to bring in two examples of both humor, joy, and art. A bit back to some of Carolina's points as well, and also on art and what that can do within a polarized or a repressive society. And also Phil's point about how we strategically choose polarization as part of our strategy, and what makes us what makes our actions and our campaigns most effective in such a state. And I want to bring you to Myanmar, Burma actually. And as some of you maybe recall, the uprising back in 2007, there was after a brutal crackdown on the widespread protesters in Myanmar. Basically, any form of street protest or public protest became impossible. And so playing with humor and mischief in another way became the impediment of the day, not because of having an external political objective with the campaign as to overruling the military regime back then or today, but basically to have to play with some internal objectives of our campaign. So basically some of the things that Carolina also talked to. So sometimes we are too eager, even sometimes, to win the political struggle within our political terrain of the day, that we forget the importance of joy and mischief and humor and community within our own ranks. And so this example is from a time of highly repression in Myanmar, and where street protests were, or public protests in general, were impossible. So this crew called Lana Action Lana Action for Burma called basically on women across Myanmar to protest the regime and its use of sexual violence by mailing panties to the generals. So they basically ridiculed the military government and the military generals in doing so, and also by playing with this highly cultural saying within Myanmar that if a patriarch or a male in authority came in contact with women's underwear, their power would vanish. So basically also playing with the cultural symbols of that society. The land action crew for Burma also used other symbolic means to ridicule the military. So I think that's also comes in play in many different cultural settings, the association of human and stray dogs, and they played with that also in this Burmese culture, where they attached the imagery of the image of the senior general to the colors of stray dogs, and the stray dogs in its thousands and hundreds running around the capital of Yangon. And then all of a sudden you would see within an hour you will see deployed military and police commanders running around like crazy, trying to get these images of the colors of stray dogs, to the huge amusement of the public. So not only did they have a objective of infusing mischief and joy within a very sad at that time movement, but also they played with tactics and principles of lowering the risk in such a repressive state, which was really interesting. So a great way and a great example of using humor to undermine authority, but also using humor and mischief to basically build a community and a sense of belonging within a very protracted repressive regime. So you can change the sliders again, Nadine. So another recent example where we are trying to balance both art and political message is basically a spin-off of BeautifulTrouble, one of our own little art projects, which we call the Climate Clock. It comes out of the BeautifulTrouble family of sorts. I don't know if any of you have seen it recently. We tried to get it up and running, this project for a year and maybe a bit more. But we managed to get a huge clock up on Union Square in New York past week as part of the climate week in New York. And sometimes, as you know, and Greta Thunberg travels the world to tell us that we need to listen to science in order to build the climate movement and the political instruments and institutions to tackle the climate crisis. But sometimes we also need to have actions that talks not only to the minds but also to our hearts. And art is a critical instrument in doing that. And basically having a clock that's based, in this case, on science, the IPCC report, which basically tells us with the consumption of fossil fuels and CO2 emissions that we have today, it counts down the time that we actually have for us to turn the curve in order to live up to the 1.5 degrees that we've agreed on in the Paris Agreement. And having that front and center in front of us, it's not only an apocalyptic vision of our immense hurry that we are in and the state of crisis we are in. It's also a lifeline. This is the time we need to build internal strength and community and the solutions and the world of tomorrow that we want to see. So art can help us do that. And it can also help us make the violations and the repressions more visible than heavy NGO 300, 600 pages reports that basically lies and collects dust in many office buildings. So it's really a powerful way of looking at the spectrum between arts and what we call kind of like traditional or political activism. So the blend in between is of an immense importance. And I think I'll hand it over to Nadine to take us through a couple of examples of also that.
Thank you, Søren. Thank you, Carolina and Phil. So no matter whether you are a sex worker in Brazil or a land defender in Uganda or a climate activist anywhere in the world, there's a lot of similarities for us to consider when we are looking at the power of incorporating arts and culture in addressing our issues. And whether it's from a very basic level of trying to polarize the issue so that you can be clear about what side you're on. I think it was Saul Alinsky who said or it's a famous saying that you polarize to organize, you compromise to win. We can talk a little bit more about what that means, or whether it's because you have to focus on building up your community itself, the autonomous community and the interdependence within your community so that you have the wherewithal to then make changes that you need to make outside of your own particular community. These things all have there's a through line of the work that we do, from the essential elements of building our organizing culture to how we communicate externally, from the groups we work with to making sure that the public understands the urgency of some of the issues that we face, and then of course wants to join our work. I mean, I will say one thing about this polarization piece is that we often need to polarize the issues. It is very difficult to come back once you've extremely polarized individuals to then come back and compromise with these individuals. And so as we develop campaigns, it's something that we must keep in mind. And use of arts and culture can both make the visible invisible, which is sometimes one of the first jobs of an activist. Many people are not aware of the problems until you can actually put them front and center to their lives for whatever reason. They have the privilege or the choice to not engage with many issues. Or because we actually need to be able to use the entry of arts and culture as a way to start a dialogue that's less fraught with fear, more open to nuance, and more able to get people out of their head and into their gut and into their heart, and therefore able to feel their way to a conversation or a dialogue. So I'm going to do some very quick overviews of some very current actions. These pictures, all of them, are actually from Washington, D.C. You might recognize the White House. These are body bags placed at the White House to try and call attention to the lack of coordinated effort on dealing with COVID in this day and the cost to human lives of that lack of coordinated effort. The top picture is from the Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C. And another way that the impacts of COVID are felt very clearly are on essential workers. And this is a painted banner on the street in front of Jeff Bezos' mansion in Washington, D.C., calling on people to acknowledge what needs to happen to protect our essential workers. Now, I'm going to talk really quickly on on three key critical issues of our time, things that we focus on a lot in the United States right now, whether it's our COVID response, our climate justice work, and our racial justice work. But all of these really require us to help people who are in denial or help people who don't see the full picture understand what is actually happening, and arts are clearly helpful in this mechanism. I'll share pictures here. Again, three other examples of making the invisible visible. You can see a boat that is high and dry in the middle of a city to bring into the discussion the costs of climate change. What is a boat doing in the middle of the city? Well, if it's in a floodplain, if it's during a hurricane, the increased amount of storms, it could end up in your city, talking about the cost of rising sea level. And then of course we have a picture from the Maldives in the lower corner, where they actually, as a country, the lowest lying country on the planet, emphasize what would happen by holding one of their parliament sessions underwater to talk about what was happening and to bring it home, to make it visible. And then the person with the white line drawing machine on the street in the left corner is actually drawing the high tide mark in New York City, trying to visibly show people what would be lost when the seas come up from lack of action on climate. Now, Another thing to think about, also bringing it together, is that art allows us to make the visible invisible in very particular ways. And during this time of COVID, many people are fearful of continuing their work or going into the streets, or in fact, they are not legally allowed to go into the streets. This is further on top of any of the closing of civil society spaces that we have because of our move towards authoritarianism in many parts of the world. So there's a double whammy here. And it's really important that we consider the full spectrum of ways we can start conversation. You know, overcoming polarization is a lot about how we start communication with, quote, the other. And arts and culture and creative activities and things that surprise or move people out of their positions of entrenchment can really help move people from their places of refusal to integrate information or even communicate across division. Here's a couple of incredibly powerful examples about guerrilla projection. And this tactic has been around a long time. I mean, I remember 20, 30 years ago, attaching a projector to a bicycle and then having a heavy battery and having to get very close to a building to project an image, and making the invisible visible and making it public so that we can have a bigger conversation about issues. In the right hand upper level, we see a projection of a COVID memorial of people who've died from COVID. Again, because of the way the virus is, because of the virus of capitalism, many people have the privilege of not actually interacting with the problems that are inherent in the system or of the disease of COVID-19. And so bringing that home, exposing that reality by making it personal and letting people into the world of grief and grieving that is front and center for many people dealing with this pandemic is critical to having the political will to move funds and move resources and to reach across the aisle to figure out solutions. The bottom picture, an incredibly beautiful picture of a projection of George Floyd, one of the men killed by police brutality, onto a Confederate statue. And this draws up many questions. Of course, it's an incredibly powerful action itself that could be done very simply during the pandemic. And also it begs questions of, why do we build statue? Who is it and what systems are they commemorating? Who should the statues be of? Can we use our history publicly to move from a place of harm and oppression to a place that honors all people? And conversations like this are really supported and started by having these projects that are seemingly not as aggressive as say marching in the streets and chanting and screaming, which also have incredible power in this moment, but also open the way for other people who are maybe not open to some of those other tactics to engage in the conversation and really think about what this world could be like and what are the other ways we can communicate across difference. Let's see, I think there's one more. Yes, I put this one in here because I wanted to actually talk a little more about the work about racial justice and police in targeting police brutality in the United States. Because in this moment, there's a lot of people who are sympathetic, I would say, across the globe to what's happening in the United States, because there might be some issues very similar in their country, or because they want to support the effort. And so in one form of very interesting topical creative destruction, Korean pop music fans were able to basically disarm a program of the Dallas police that wanted people to report on behavior in their city by sending in videos of suspicious behavior or people that they saw doing things that they didn't like. And in the United States, as in probably a lot of places, this wasn't a way to actively discriminate against people of color, particularly Black folks in the US, because people are often over subscribing suspicious behavior to Black people in the US because of systemic racism. And so this group of K-pop fans managed to send so many little videos that they actually took the app down. It became useless to the Dallas police station, the Dallas police. And so I just offer this because this was done from many miles away, from a constituency that you might think was not at all interested in this work, but this was able to facilitate dialogue about these problems. It was effective in taking down the app that was basically part of the systemic violence of the white supremacist culture in the police department. And it was very also humorous to many people and a fun way to use this fan base that was completely out of the expectations of what people wanted. And so when we talk, so it goes back to this joy as a revolutionary act. All of the work that we do and in trying to engage with people doesn't have to be done with a straight face. Sometimes humor and joy can be your ticket in to have a conversation or start building a relationship that touches people's in their hearts or in their gut, moves them out of just their narrative in their heads. And we find that a lot of this work can be incredibly effective. So just wanted to sort of bring it home that you'll see the thread through the stories that we've told today, whether we're talking about building up communities' ability to support themselves before they enter into discourse into the broader political scene in Brazil with sex workers, or whether we're talking about Korean pop fans who found a way to support Black Lives Matter in Dallas by using their own culture to stop an oppressive watching system. There are ways to incorporate arts and culture to support dialogue and trust building, which of course, as we know, and you will be talking about for the next few days, can really help us move our dialogues into a place, or move our conversations in a place that will reduce the fear that we have and increase our potential for resolution, and be able to offer, in a big way too, be able to offer a picture to folks who are involved that there is an alternative, that there's a vision we can work towards, and that there's a place for everyone in that future. And when we polarize and we highlight individuals, often what happens is those individuals do not see a place in the future for themselves, and therefore they fight against change. So if we can polarize systemically and target the systemic change that we want, we open up a way in the later parts of our campaigns to build, to compromise with those groups and individuals, helping everyone see a better future. So we're gonna end there. Oh, one thing I'll say, just as a way to stay in touch, if people are interested and excited by stories of resistance and creative change, you can join our Beautiful Trouble email list, or you can see the link up here, bit.ly/getinTrouble. We have an Instagram account where we constantly are talking about things like this. And of course, you can find our resources at beautifultrouble.org. So really thank everyone, and we look forward to all your questions. I'm going to stop my screen share so we can all go back to conversation. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Nadine. And thank you also, Carolina, Phil, and Søren, for sharing your stories, which it was so many of them with so great ideas about how to challenge practices in society which we consider unjust and harmful for a particular group of people in society. And I hope this was also enough provocative for creating a discussion. So I will welcome you now to share your comments or questions. And now I would again like to remind you, if you can switch on your camera, if it's possible. And if you would like to verbally say your question, please give me some signal. You can either do it by raising hand in front of camera, I will see you, or by using the tool in within the tool of participants. There is a possibility for you to select the blue hand, which is raising the hand, and you can show me that you would like to say something. So if you can use one of these two possibilities or anything, which I can recognize as a signal of willingness to discuss or to ask, I would be very happy. And you also can use the chat for writing. If you have some difficulties with the connection, you can also write the questions or comments there. So anyone would like to start with some question? If not so far, I can start with some questions. I very much like your very creative and provocative ideas, especially this panties for peace. I think it's a so disturbing idea, especially in cultural context. And my question would be, how you select, well, do you ever think what is too much? That especially in very traditional societies, I can imagine that some form of protest or some way of getting the message through might be too much for the cultural context of the country. Is there something like too much, or you do not see it in that way? Anyone from you, if you would like to respond to that, I would be happy. Just give me a signal.
Any of us want to take it? I have some ideas, but anyone? Carolina? Soren? Bill?
Please go. We can support you, Nadine. Yeah.
All right. I'll start off with a couple of things. So it's a great question. For example, and I'll use maybe 2 examples from my personal experience. So for many years, one somewhat lightweight and one a little heavier. For many years, I worked for Greenpeace in the United States. And as you know, Greenpeace is an international environmental campaigning organization. We do some really wild things, right? I personally drove a little boat in front of a nuclear warship to stop a nuclear test in Fangatofa, Mararoa in the South Pacific back in 1990s. Like we don't mince words, as they say. So we do some things. So in the United States, this, you may or may not know this, but one of our traditions, although we're supposedly separate church and state in the United States, is that every Christmas would they bring a giant tree, like a very old growth tree, maybe 150-year-old, 200, 300-year-old tree that they cut down and they ship across the country and they put it up at the White House. Like every year they do this. So Greenpeace, we have a campaign against cutting down old growth forests. And so someone has this great idea that we should climb up the Christmas tree and stop the Christmas tree lighting ceremony, right? That's like a huge thing in Christmas, right? Christmas tree lighting ceremony, big deal. Everybody's done it, hundreds of whatever years. So people are very excited. The young people especially, we're all very excited. We're gonna climb this tree, we're gonna cut the wires, we're gonna do everything. No Christmas tree lighting, right? This is an abomination that they kill this old growth tree. So luckily, someone spoke, and it was one of our administrators who said, you know, I am a deeply religious person. And if you do this, the only message that will go out is that you are the Grinch that stole Christmas. We will not care about the old growth tree. We will just hate you so much. And we will not hear what you say. And we didn't do that action. We actually did not do that action. Some people have tried it. You have never heard about it because people will not respond to it appropriately. That is a very minor form of that cultural thing that goes too far. You really have to think about it. Yeah, so there's some, I'm sure you have other examples that come to mind when you think about it that way. And another problem that we have in the United States is around property destruction. People in the United States do not understand property destruction. They don't see, many parts of the world see the accumulation of property itself as violent. And so they don't consider property destruction as part of violence. But in the United States, we have a cult of property, and we think that property destruction is an assault on our First Amendment rights or something like this. So when people destroy property, you are often unable to get good coverage for the issue that you're dealing with. So whether there are, and this is one of the tools that I would say the right wing uses against the left. You've seen it very recently with the Black Lives Matter uprisings, where white vigilante right-wingers will go and start smashing windows of local stores to increase the negativity around the protests and sort of delegitimize their work. Or if you see, we also have an issue where there are lots of left-wing groups as well that do want to use targeted property destruction, maybe, you know, burning down a ski resort that they think shouldn't be in a pristine wilderness. But again, the communication is very difficult on the issue because no one can, their actions are speaking so loudly, no one can hear what they're saying on this particular trigger issue of property destruction. So I'll just leave those two examples and see if anybody else wants to chime in.
Mm-hmm. Soren,
Yeah.
would you like to? Yeah, please go.
No, yeah, I think, yeah, lovely question. And I think it's, it is this critical balance. It is a really delicate balance, as I think in Nadine's Christmas tree example, kind of, you can, I mean, I've been in so many examples where we get, you know, all excited about, yeah, we're going to do this, until we actually, you know, listen to our guts, or just ask your mom, or, you know, your neighbor, or, you know, kind of like, hey, I'm thinking about doing this and this. What do you think? I mean, a recent example was actually with the climate clock. So we were doing this, we were brainstorming, we thought, that's a great idea. Let's have this massive clock up. Imagine you'll go down, you know, New York, or in Copenhagen even, you'll see this apocalyptic clock countdown, da, da, da. And I told it to my girlfriend, and she was basically just numb. She almost kind of like cried. I mean, she was emotionally so distressed by that imagery of having herself walking there with our kids and looking at this apocalyptic clock. And so her immediate response, you are not going to do that. You are not going to do that. Unless, and then we talked over it, unless you build in some kind of hope that it's actually possible to turn things around. And that was the whole idea of actually building in the lifeline, saying that it's not an apocalyptic club, it is a lifeline. So having that response system within your action crew or campaign crew or movement is just so critical, because I think, coming back to Phil's point about the spectrum as well, we're so used to make actions that supports our own imagination. We live in those small bubbles sometimes, right? Or we basically go hate on the opposition, and we rarely listen to the middle ground that is so important to listen to, and to because they are the ones, whether we like it or not, that are feeding the groundwork of our cultural terrain. Basically, it's not the outer poles. It's kind of like, it's all the chunkiness in between that we need to learn from. So I think it's really a great question. So although you like to go out and do a lot of stuff, I mean, open your ears, listen to what's actually going on, and basically test out your ideas. Ask your girlfriend or your mom, or kind of like, how's this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that Julia Roque is raising hand, so I will give her a possibility to ask in a moment. But I was asking this question also because the topic of this conference is actually building the trust in society, and we are, well, our kind of perception is that polarization, if it is permanent and if it is deepening in the society, it's really doing very bad job on democracy itself, because the people are losing hope for future, are losing hope for democracy and for processes of change. And so my question in that context is really how to use these great tools of making visible difficult issues and struggle of different groups of society in the way which does not undermine the trust in the future and in system which we can challenge, but we cannot break without really the possibility for the future. So if you would like to touch on that, I would be happy, and then Julia can follow. But yeah, any response to that, or? Yeah, Nadine, please.
No, I was thinking maybe Carolina. Do you want to say?
Carolina.
You know, I think there are many ways we can go about this. I like to think of participation as a tool that allows us to dream together. So this is very simple, right? So if you do a luncheon with a movement, if you do a day at the park, if you do just building relationships and building moments where people are allowed to dream together and project for the future. When we think of movements, a lot of the theories and tools around strengthening social movements, I always say that they treat these living organisms as if they were a machine, right? So if you push the right buttons and if you apply the right ingredients or whatever, you'll get this kind of result. But there is not a strong cause and effect relationship, as strong, at least not as strong as we would imagine. So we have to create these open spaces where the unexpected is able to come up. And it's not, we're not always able to control. So, well, I want people to dream together, so why not having a day at the park? But we have to create these spaces and see what comes from them and be able to build on that. So I think once we let go of some of our, eagerness to really control what's going to happen in the movement and really move the pieces around as we were building a puzzle, then we see the best surprises come up and we see things happen like you said, Kaya. People are able to dream together. People are able to build visions for the future. It's a lot about letting go. I really believe in the sense of purpose that emerges when we let go of trying to control living organisms.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, Phil, please.
Yeah, maybe there's also something to be said about self-interest. For the organizer has to understand why somebody does what they do. For example, why do people go to church? There might be a number of different motivations. Some of them, it might be the self-interest of, going to heaven or being pious. Others might appreciate the sense of belonging. Others might find their values affirmed in that space. So these are the motivators. We can't look at humans as objects. They're subjects. They're motivated by different things. So yeah, ask your mom, ask your girlfriend, ask your boyfriend, so on and so forth. Why would you come to this? Why or why not? Would you participate in this? Why or why not? That's where you'll build trust. When people know that, we are here together to do this or to achieve this, they're coming together around a common goal. So forging that trust will be easier once it's kind of like on the table. Why are we here?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, Nadine?
I'll add just another little thing. Is like the most powerful actions that we do are the actions that are prefigurative, that they actually put in place some of this world that we want, as well as saying no to what we don't want. So there's Barbara Deming, was an incredible activist and a writer. She describes the two hands of nonviolence, as it were. The one hand that actually says no, that says stop, and the other hand that is open to your other truth or the other world and the possibility for change later. And actually, those of you online watching want to play with this position, it's very physically interesting position. So go ahead and put one hand up and a stop, no further, this is the line, and put the other hand out, open, welcoming, and able to receive. And play with it, switch your hands. Like and when I have people do this when you're standing up, there's a real interesting embodiment for some of us, particularly who work a lot through our bodies, as Carolina was pointing out how important it is to enter some of these conversations from our personal truth in our gut or in our heart rather than our brain. But the other thing is like, how do we, if we create these spaces where we are saying no and yes at the same time, like Gandhi's Salt March, right? I always ask people when they're planning their campaign, what's the salt here? Like what the salt was the physical manifestation for the Indians that of the resistance to the British Empire. And many of them didn't really care in the personal day-to-day life about getting rid of the Brits. Sure, they might have not wanted an empire there, but they were too involved day-to-day to worry about the bigger political ramifications. But making salt, everybody needed salt to live. And the restrictions on making salt were the perfect marriage of challenging the British regime and taking care of people's needs. Going back to this idea of breakfast is persuasive, one of the mobilization sayings right now in the United States around racial justice and Black Lives Matter work, as well as dealing with COVID, is we keep us safe, right? Mm-hmm. And so how do we build these communities of support? How do we help us get what we need to survive? And then not stopping there. So like all of this, mutual aid where people are delivering groceries, that's all really great. And it's just gone through the roof all over the world. People are doing it, and it's really inspiring. But we can't just stop there if as activists or as people who care about transforming our system into something that's healthier. We have to help people understand that the reason why we're doing this mutual aid work or taking care of people's basic needs is because the system is broken, the system is violent, it's not actually taking care of our needs, and we need to stop doing, just giving the handout, but think politically about how do we move to build a better world that actually takes care of us in a more transformative way. And so I think that that's part of the trust and the hope, like embedding that work integrally into what we do. And people may have seen like just another beautiful example of the resistance embodying the change. During the pipeline struggles all over the world, people would, oil, fossil fuel pipeline struggles, people would, on the path of proposed pipelines, build structures like a solar powered barn or putting in a community garden, which is what we want to have happen in those spaces, not the continuation of an extractive, oppressive fossil fuel industry. And instead of just putting a big ugly blockade up, these blockades are presenting an image of the future and inviting people to come along with our vision. So that's one way of thinking about it.
Thank you for these great examples. Julia Roig, could you please ask or comment?
I'm hoping that my video is okay. Hi, everybody. It's good to see you. And thank you so much to Nadine and the BeautifulTrouble team for the fantastic examples. I wanted to put a question on the table of something that I've really found challenging, and I still haven't found an answer to it. So I wanted to get your reaction. One of your examples and cards and recommendations was to use humor. And especially under autocratic regimes where it's, if there's kind of playfully making fun of a leader, that's hard to handle, and that's a way of breaking down kind of the strength that they may have. And I, with regards even to this kind of open hand that you were just kind of saying, there's the stop and the opening of the hand. When societies have become so polarized that the leader is a symbol, or the leader is so personally identified with a side's identity, that when you make fun of that leader, you're making fun of them as supporters of that leader. Is there some, exactly, yeah, that one. Is there also the danger that the open hand has been closed by that very tactic of making fun? Because then the reaction is to want to be, to protect the leader that you care about, that is so tied to your identity, because somehow the identities have been polarized, not the issue. And I still don't have an answer. I love the humor. I love making fun. It rings true to me. And yet I see the reaction as being a closed fist and not a welcoming hand. So I would just love to hear you speak a little bit more about that. Thank you, PDCS. I'm sorry I can't keep my camera on.
Thank you, Julia. Who would like to react on that?
Maybe I could respond in part to Julia, because in Brazil right now we have this exact problem. So the president has become increasingly isolated, but then again, the small constituency that still supports him is extremely loyal to him and extremely violent towards the opposition. So what we have been seeing here is that whenever a use of humor sort of provokes a response of rage on the other side, you have to really employ a sort of situational analysis to see whether that reaction is ultimately even good for your movement or for the issue you're trying to address. In Brazil right now, provoking the rage of the constituency behind President Bolsonaro is actually good for our cause, because the polls tell us, and mainstream media tells us, and a lot of elements tell us, that really reinforcing the image of an angry group of highly ideological and obsessed constituents it really helps ultimately the movements that are on other parts of the political spectrum, right? So to reinforce that image. Now, for these things, I think that's why, you know, most of the analysis behind the choices we make with movements, they are very situational. So we have to try and consider everything that's going on in that society at that time. I don't think that there is a single rule that we can apply to this. And then again, always remember that still, regardless of how much analysis we do and how many scenarios we have in mind, things don't always go as we plan. So we have to be always prepared for either response from society and really build on whatever outcome we get.
Mm-hmm. Any additional comment or development on this idea? Or if not, any other question? I noticed that there was a question from Katarina in chat. So if you would like to verbalize that, it's possible. Katarina, please.
Yes, I can. As a co-host, I couldn't use this icon, raise hand. That's why I was writing the question in the chat. So just from the technical point of view. I received some answers from Søren, but I would like to maybe focus on that you work locally and you know your community, but sometimes it's quite difficult to unify on certain values. So if you would like to ask the artist community to help you to channel your message, so what are your first step? You know, like I couldn't imagine do the analysis of the artist, local artist. So sometimes you need to just risk, you know. So, and you know, maybe some artists for a long time, but sometimes not, and they are active. And like your process, if you like take a risk and these artists are quite famous, so you use them like as a channel, but sometimes you recognize that the values they're somehow protected are not in the same you would like to support. So there could be some kind of clash, you know. So if you have some ideas, or just tell us more like how it looks like, because if you present it, it looks really easy. Like everybody could do it with a success. But I could imagine in process, in your experiences, you have some also fails, and maybe some tips like what not to do, or you know, just tell us more about the process, how you create this balance, and when you start to work with artists or other communities, so what to like watch out, what to not repeat. Like, could you share, please, some kind of these fails as well? Or good tips. Thank you.
So if you are able to respond, some of you, give me some signal. So I understand that Nadine is also artist herself, so it's not a cooperation with someone additional who you need to find out the common message with, but especially if you need some creativity coming from different people who maybe do not share the idea for and the urge for doing some activity. So how you actually involve them, people from art community, artists, creative people.
And I can start, but there's maybe a lot to say. There's a lot of different ways to approach this. But so one really basic thing that we encourage folks to do is to have principles or values or a ground agreements in your group. And I encourage this no matter whether you're trying to find an artist or anyone to work with, or whether you're just trying to grow your group. have some stated principles, because it will enable you not only to grow the group in a transparent and coherent way, it enables you to build that group and understand through the process of coming up with these principles how you're going to work together in the future. And that in it is very powerful, and it eliminates a lot of arguments later, whether you're trying to decide about which artist to work with or what particular action to do. If it violates your principles, you're not going to do it, or you have to change your principles, or you have to find another group, right there. And it's so helpful. So we just generally don't encourage people to work alone. We encourage them to come up with groups, find people to work with. A group could be 2 people. It can be many people, obviously, but work together and have some basis for your work together. We call them principles, values, whatever your statements are. Now, about working with artists, you'll automatically see that there are any number of people who become, and I have come up with about 12 different categories for methods of art, right? So it's all of the usual things like drawing and painting and singing and dancing and theater and writing and all of that. But there's also the bigger, I often don't use the word art, I use the word culture, right? I say I'm a cultural worker, not an artist, because then that incorporates things like delineating safe space or preserving traditional language or farming methods, or, you know, all the pieces of ourselves that come into and count as who we are in this world, and what allow us, as Carolina mentioned, like to challenge capitalism that says that we all and all of our backgrounds don't matter as individuals, that we should all be the same homogenized corporate structure. So when we bring in our whole selves, our culture, our arts, it's much more powerful, much more engaging, much more fun. We could go on and on. But it also is very interesting. However, if we're going to talk just about traditional arts, painters, writers, those people, there is an inherent problem that a lot of people engage that kind of work because they like to work by themselves. And so this goes full circle to the, like, don't work by yourself. Like, we're not going to be able to make change by ourselves. So there has to be, and we do quite a bit of work with Beautiful Trouble with artists, helping artists figure out how they can work with organizations, and organizations figuring out how to work with artists. And the real basic thing is to have principles for both what your organization is going to do and what you stand for, what you believe in, what things you respect. And then the artist or anybody you engage with has to agree on those things to begin with. And helping people understand that you know, there's a constant, I'm sure you've all had this dialogue or debate about change comes from within. You must change yourself first. Change is from the outside. Everything has to change outside. It doesn't matter if you change inside. If you don't change, you know, so there's an ongoing conversation about this, and it's very much alive in the art community. And there's a challenge, even like looking at the climate clock that Søren showed. I would say within our group, we have this conversation about how elaborate and how fancy and how many resources you have to put into something as an art project versus the impact it has. Mm-hmm. And sometimes no one will look at what you do unless you use gold paint or you make it 300 feet tall. But sometimes what your goal is to build community and structures, and using gold paint or insisting on something be 300 feet tall is counterproductive to what your goal is. And so I know that's not a real answer, but this is more about, it's an art, all of this work is an art, not a science. And so there aren't hard and fast rules. There are principles and theories that we can engage with and adapt to our own context. And that's what I encourage people to do.
I'm here just playing with your cards. And I don't know, probably it's opposite, but it's written, everyone is an artist. So I think I'm just going to do promotion. There is these cards from Beautiful Trouble, and you can really play with them. Okay, any other question? Yeah, Nadine also has some in front of her. Any other question or comment? We still have, yeah, Fateme, please go on.
So hi everyone, and thank you for very interesting examples, like very successful ones. I really enjoyed. I have a problem with my understanding of how you can find a balance when you want to raise like any issue or resist really toward dictatorship or anything. What if you are trapped in a very totalitarian and dictatorship society, and even your art or your picture making or your voice on internet or here or there, like any sort of even peaceful gathering is stopped by a government, and you're pursued to you can even be put into the prison or anything. How can you face with that? Like, how can you find a balance in extremely dictatorship, and how could you make your voice in that situation?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Phil.
Maybe I could, yeah, maybe I could respond to Fatima. Mm-hmm. Thank you for raising this. It's a very common, question about civil resistance. How do we survive amidst repression and harsh conditions? Specifically here in Uganda, artists have been attacked lately. We've been talking about artists for the past several minutes. To make it simple, it's kind of illegal to do art, and you can get arrested for doing so. So Uganda has had a dictatorship for the same dictatorship for 35 years. So this is longer than 80% of the population has been alive. So you can imagine that under the same military dictatorship, you begin to accept as normal things which are very abnormal. As we kind of when I was in university in 2010, we started kind of like a student group that would help groups around Uganda resist the dictatorship, with the ambition of working toward a political transition. And we suffered through a lot of arrests, and at some point we had to start to be more strategic, not to necessarily avoid these arrests or repression, but to prevent them from throwing the rest of our proactive work into chaos. Because when you're facing serious human rights abuses, it's easy to kind of go away from your main plan. You're no longer proactive. You're now just doing jail solidarity, trying to get lawyers and all this kind of stuff. So at some point, we decided that we needed kind of a parallel wing of our movement that could only work on basically something that we called rapid response. But this comprises different working groups. So we had several teams for jail solidarity, which were based on geography, a team for media when we deemed it strategic to use media in case of arrests or disappearances or torture, sort of like a health and well-being team. So this is not just medical care for wounded folks, but also psychological support. If nothing else, this helps kind of break down that activist machismo kind of culture and encourages people to actually talk about how they feel and what they fear and this kind of thing. Then we had a human rights documentation group that's mandated to reach out to, Amnesty, frontline defenders, all this sort of institutional allies. I'm forgetting one group. Oh yeah, there's a legal team. Which maintains basically relationships with lawyers and legal support organizations. And so now we are willing to take greater risks because we know that when we're picked up from our homes, when we're arrested at a public action, we will have that support behind us. Within a few hours, somebody will show up with food, often a toothbrush, because we spend multiple days in detention quite often. So we had to kind of systematize how we give that support and kind of separate it a bit from other aspects of the sort of anti-authoritarian movement in Uganda. So I'm just going to share, maybe my my comrades can add to that, but I'll share a link, Fatima, in the chat, which is about the rapid response system and some of the principles that we use to set it up.
Yeah, I'm gonna build on this, because before you get to this point, you also, arts and culture become incredibly valuable in doing things that are less risky, right? So instead of all going to Tiananmen Square and getting mowed down by your government, you could do dispersed actions. A classic way to think about it is an example from Chile, in fact, where folks who were protesting the Pinochet regime in the mines were going to go on strike. And they got word from the government that the army, the military, would shoot them as they came out of the mines. And they had every reason to believe that, in fact, if they did that, the military would just shoot them. They'd be sitting ducks. And so what did they do? They called off the strike and instead used dispersed tactics that were low-level tactics of ordinary life that served to build the resistance until they could actually figure out something else to do. So they did things like cacerolazas, banging pots and pans at night at 9 o'clock. And then, are people cooking dinner or are they protesting? I don't know. How do you arrest everybody in their kitchen banging a pot and pan at 9 o'clock at night, right? And people then serve to build the movement and connect with each other. People did slowdowns, and instead of actually striking in the big cities, they would just move and walk in the streets very slowly. Are people resisting? Are they just tired? Do they not want to go to work for personal reasons? How do you arrest everybody in a city walking slowly? And so all kinds of things like these that happen. Great example, not too long ago from Syria, just before things got really bad, but all protest was outlawed. They took these little ping pong balls, and in the streets of Damascus and Aleppo in the hills, they wrote resistance messages on these little balls, and they let them flow down the streets, which did a number of things. It meant that people knew that there was active resistance happening. It was completely unattached to individuals, so very low risk. It drove the authorities nuts. Like, it undermined authorities because you could see them chasing the little balls all around the street, trying to get rid of the balls that said freedom, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And it empowered people to start looking around and figure out what kind of resistance movement was there and who they could connect with. Another classic, so it's really a difference of, and even here in the United States now, we are thinking about this. Like, how do we protect our country from a coup? People are gonna pour into a street. Typically people go to one place to meet. Is that a ridiculous thing to do? Are we gonna be at Tiananmen Square moment? Or are we gonna be cornered by the police? Or do we need to have dispersed tactics all over and think about how we disrupt things in different locations? So just offering that there's a lot of thinking, and the arts and culture actually has a lot of good input onto expanding, if you will, the playing field for resistance and for protest and defense across a bigger potential space. So
I'll just add one more thing that I forgot to mention, which is that we often think that in repressive environments, we need to retreat or have tactics that are much safer. And often that is true, especially at the beginning of a movement, because you want a lot of people to participate, and you won't get those numbers unless there is some kind of safety that they can do, even if you do have, you know, some members that are practicing more risky or confrontational tactics. However, there's an example from 2017 in Uganda when we had very severe crackdowns. A number of our members were arrested throughout the country, where we tried to actually go on the offensive in that moment. So one of the things that we did was to create a crowdfunding campaign. So however long they were detained, we would keep the crowdfunder open, and we raised over 5,000 euros. And then that money didn't go to lawyers or medical support or anything like that. We had that other support. We put that money to organizing for actions against police brutality. So the police knew that, you know, if we keep these people long, they're going to get more money to organize against us. And actually, what was so interesting, we had to work with some lawyers to visit some of the detention centers and kind of discreetly tell them, like, try to prolong your detention here. They want to actually get you out. But, you know, we need this crowdfunder, and we also want you to stay here more than 48 hours so that we have a case where you can sue them, because the Constitution of Uganda allows for a limited period of detention. So it's quite an interesting thing. And after that, we organized several citizens' arrests where groups in Eastern, Western, and Northern Uganda would arrest actually corrupt leaders and policemen in their communities. So instead of you know, playing defense, we actually went on the offense. And the police, of course, found it very hard to like mobilize to arrest those people. I can get into those stories maybe if you want to reach out to me, but of course it was very difficult for the police to make arrests at a time when they're just, you know, protecting themselves.
Thank you very much. This is happening almost every time, that when we need to finish, the discussion is becoming most vibrant. So I am afraid I have to somehow officially get to the closing of this session, because this was the announced time for a session. I see that János Wagner from Hungary would, but very short comment, János, please. Please go on.
I just wanted to tell you that I'm still in, but I can hold it for the next time. So
okay, okay, thank you.
But could we hear about János' mother?
He would say yes. She would say yes.
Yeah, you are really testing me as a moderator, yes, at the moment.
No, we had a good chat. We had a good chat conversation. What you did not see, that's why.
I was observing chat, and I wanted to do the official closure. And if you like to stay longer, you can do so and continue in discussion. But for the people who just reserve these 2 hours and have another obligations, I would like to do the closing comments. And really, if you would like to stay longer, you can stay longer and continue. And these closing remarks are, we will find a way how to share with you links and the part of conversation from chat, because there are very valuable links and information. Thank you very much, Anio, for sharing also in the chat. We will, and I think BeautifulTrouble doesn't have a problem with that, share with you also PowerPoint presentation from this session. You will get link for recorded session as well. So these 3 things you will get. And before getting back to the discussion, I will ask Lukáš to do some promotion on next sessions and of our coffee breaks. Lukáš.
Yes, because the coffee breaks are the platform meant to continue conversations a bit further. So thank you very much, everyone, for all your contributions. I really enjoyed this session, and we have a lot ahead of us. Tomorrow, we will see plenty of workshops from morning till 5 o'clock in the afternoon. They'll be in 1.5 hours long slots. And they will usually be running 2 or 3 parallel workshops. Some of the people, maybe Edwin and Jordi, I see you here, will be running sessions on positive narratives, and there will be others very interesting sessions. So feel free to join. And then Thursday will be more diverse in terms of forms. In the morning, we will have 2 panel discussions similar to this one. The first one in the morning, we will start with the radical trust. And that one I especially invite you, because we will hear interesting stories on what actually happens when we meet the very people we disagree with or that hate us. I think that's going to be very engaging. And then we will also hear right after that, we will have the role of media in polarization, and we will have for example, Jessica Aro, a Finnish journalist and activist who uncovered the Russian troll farms, and she also became their target of online hate. And so we will hear lots of interesting stories. That then in the afternoon we will move in parallel sessions again, engaging workshops, more interactive, with even some simulations, online simulations. That's fun. I encourage you to try. We already tested it and it's fun. And at the end of Thursday, we will also meet again in a World Cafe, where we want to reflect a little bit on the lessons learned from the whole conference. As I said, it's an expert conference where we want to adapt our work to the current societal situations and to what's happening. So we want to learn from each other a lot, if possible. And then there is a bonus program on Friday on comedy and humor in activism. We touched on that a little bit today, but we have an excellent Italian living in Czech Republic who does stand-up comedy himself. So he has lots of good stories to share, and I think it will be also fun. So that's roughly what's ahead of us. And in the meantime, especially on Wednesday and Thursday, we'll have these online coffee breaks. It's our experiment on how to engage more. You know, what happens during the conferences, that the best conversations happen during the coffee breaks. You go and reach out to those people you've seen talking or shared some interesting thoughts or presentations or whatever. You want to catch up more on that. Please feel free throughout the conference to schedule some appointments. You can do it through chat or at the end of every session. We will share with you the link where you can go on Zoom and talk and even meet randomly if you would just want to have a coffee with somebody or lunch, and if you feel lonely in your isolation right now. So that's ahead of us, and I believe and I hope you will enjoy the program, and thank you very much.
And I properly did not thank Nadine, Carolina, and Phil and Søren. Thank you very much for sharing your stories. It was incredibly inspiring for all of us. So thank you from different time zones coming to us and sharing very inspirational stories. Thank you very much. And I can clap for everybody. Thank you very much.
Feel free to unmute and say goodbye in whatever language you'd like, or hello. Thank you so much for having us. Really happy to be here.
Thank you very much. If someone would like to stay a little bit longer, you are free to do so. If you would like to ask or comment privately something, we can stay for approximately 30 minutes more, so you can stay and continue. János, would you like to share?
I have to go.
Okay, if you have to go, you have to go.
I'm more than happy to share it if someone is interested.
Ciao, everyone. I had a great time.
Bye-bye, Carolina.
No, it just came to my mind.
I'm listening.
Hi. I just wanted to share with you that probably you. Okay, that's the most important. I'm just curious whether you heard about that. Okay, in Hungary we have now our strange government, and they reach every area of our life, and they reached also the universities now. And the last one was the University of Art and Theater, theater and movie art university. They changed the leadership of the university just one day to another. And then the students said, okay, if that's what you do, then we have an answer. And they occupied the building, the university. And now it is there occupied already for three or more weeks. And
really? We haven't heard about it, even though we are neighbor. Yeah, so I haven't heard it.
It is occupied by them. They are living inside. They don't let anyone getting in. And the new leadership, nobody can get in. There are no classes, no nothing. And they are open to any kind of discussion, but the government is not talking to them. And so I'm sure, they are in beautiful trouble. You can see that they enjoy it very much. And it's also funny because they are having all kind of events in front of the building. And it's very different because there are these young people with beautiful voices. They know how to talk. They know how to give the speeches. So that's what everyone is listening to. And even American very famous artists are supporting them now. So I mean, the government is really in trouble. That I mean, they got such big attention. And you know, it was also artists doing something, and it's really amazing. And nobody knows what is gonna happen because they are in and they don't let anyone else. And they are absolutely non-violent, so they just close the doors.
Where is the best place to follow that, Janos?
I have no idea. I mean, the university is just across the street of our office, so I go there and
really
watch
does not help us so much.
No, but I mean, I can check some. I mean, because of course in the Hungarian media you can follow it, but I never checked any English reading. But I will check and then send it to you, Kaya, and then you can share it with the others, because I think it's very funny.
It's really strange because I don't know, Martina and Lukáš, whether you have seen that in Slovak news, but I haven't heard anything about it.
I was sure that it is. Because I mean, I know that that very famous, I don't remember who, but very famous American artists are supporting them. And of course, our government is telling that this is because they are Jews as well or something, or the Hungarians are hidden blacks and that's why the black artists are some or you know, these stupid ideas always come, but that's... Okay, so if I find something in English, I will send it to you and then you can check.
That would be great. Yeah, especially if it is some visuals also from that, it would be incredibly powerful to see what's happening there.
Okay, because I mean, they were reaching all different universities and nothing really. I mean, when the CEU, there was a huge demonstration, but then on the end they left. But this is something different. So. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
But anyway, it was a great pleasure to be with you and. See you tomorrow. I'm attending another one tomorrow. So.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So thank you very much. Phil, would you like to comment or just say goodbye?
No, I just wanted to say thanks.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to see you. And hopefully we will on following days as well. Bye-bye.
Yeah, please. Good luck.
Yeah. Thank you.
Take care, Phil. Thank you. Take care, Martina,
See you later.
as well.
Thanks for organizing.
Bye-bye.
Dobre, môžeme sa aj osobne.
Môžeme to aj vypnúť, nahrávanie.
Áno.